Good afternoon again. It's nice to see you all. This is part 3. Today we're doing resetting the table for generative thinking. So, what are we talking about? We are talking about sort of the nitty-gritty of things today. How we focus, how we signal change, how we get over the humps that we've talked about in past sessions, right? What are the parts of our meetings that help or hinder our generative thinking, our deep discussion on complex issues? Are there simple changes we can make? I know last time we're talking about efficient meetings, everybody gets worried about meetings getting longer and longer, and we're talking about easier things today. Maybe simple, maybe in the eye of beholder. We'll see. So, speed racer recap, just super quick. Remember, this is part 3 of a 3-part series. First, we demystified. Then you heard my case about effective meetings being more important than efficient ones. And today we're setting the table for making a change, right? Remember, we talked about generative thinking and generative work being about heading up to the headwaters, being able to look forward, out, and back, so that we can get to root causes and we can see just the whole picture around us instead of reacting to what's right in front of us down on the beachfront. We want consequential decisions that last, right? We also know that we're starting from a certain deficit. We've got barriers to overcome, and a lot of them are ones we're hardwired to up in here. They just are. We've got emotions, we've got biases, we've got habits, for goodness sake, that all urge us to, again, sacrifice effectiveness in the name of efficiency because our brain wants us to be efficient. So, practically speaking, I don't want your boards, your governing bodies, you, to be making decisions that are short-sighted. I want you to uh, avoid all of those costs and the risks associated with it. And it's particularly important for this audience, I think, as risk-sharing pools, because you are so complex, because the very nature of your work is uncertainty. And because of where you sit on the boundary between public and private, nonprofit and government, all those sorts of things, meaning matters, and your ability to articulate it out in the world matters. So the solution is we counter with generative approaches, right? We think first, we think hard about what's at issue and what's at stake. Again, we don't just look to the future. We look back to learn from our experience. We look out to analyze what's going on around us. And of course, we look ahead to anticipate and strategize. But where we're going to focus today is on the focus part, right? And in order to focus, we need time to think and discuss, space to explore and play, permission to question and change, free from distractions, which we know we can't do, so as free as we can, right? So back to the brain and the body for just a minute. In order to get the focus, right, we need to reinforce or replenish our deliberative capacity, to tip the balance in the favor of system 2, because we know we're tipped in the other balance by nature. We need to interrupt our reactive autopilots that are on the number 1 side, and we need to clearly signal for ourselves and one another the change in expectation around that. Subtle doesn't work here. We need to be very direct and very obvious in these shifts if we're going to succeed in boosting the deliberative, interrupting the reactive, and going forward. So what are some of the drains on our deliberative capacity that we're going to be looking at with all the tools that we get to in a little bit? Time of day, oddly enough. And not just are you a morning person, are you an evening person, but some of the things that are just seem to be hardwired within us. And we'll talk about that. Our cognitive load, what's going on in our brain? What's the stress? What's the fatigue? What are the distractions? Are we trying to multitask? The folks that write about this stuff are very clear to say that paying attention, the pay part, is real. It's a price we're paying. We only have so much. Our body, what drains our deliberative capacity? Our body can. When we have lack of fuel, when we have lack of activity, when we have lack of comfort. And the decision process itself, there are stressors within that. Are we overloaded with information or pressed for time? Are we looking at really complex or uncertain things? There are natural stressors in the system that drain our ability to deliberate versus react. So we need to interrupt the routines, especially the routines and the habits, and using these 4 concepts that I talk about: time, space, permission, and free from distractions, right? So starting to think in terms of rituals and practice instead of habits and routines. We'll come back to this. But the difference between a ritual and a routine is the attitude behind it, right? Becoming more intentional, slowing down, and knowing what we're doing. And the practice part is in every step of the way, doing it with the intent of improving. With every step of the way, we need to wave whatever flags we need to wave, put up whatever signs we need to put up, to make it very obvious to ourselves and to others that we're doing something different. Because again, it's so easy to slip back into our mental grooves. And unless we're obvious and hold ourselves accountable, we don't get to the structured part. All right, so let's dive in with the first piece of the equation: time to think and discuss. So the key here in the balance is a risk analysis. And again, this is right up your alley. This is where you guys live. What leeway do you have? What is that 1% change going to do to your trajectory, right? Can you sacrifice accuracy for speed? Do you have enough experience that your intuition is sufficiently educated that you can rely on it, as opposed to getting the specifics, right? It's about discernment. And as you're starting out on this path, I'd encourage you, again, you're going to take small steps first, but assume that you need a little bit more time and there's a little bit more risk as you get started and you feel your way, right? Because you're coming from the opposite end of the spectrum. So in the diving, you're diving in part of it, overdo a little bit, and then you can back up. What are some of the timing mistakes that we make in all of our meetings? And I see it day in and day out in my work, and you feel it too, right? Scheduling back-to-back meetings. The research is clear that I've seen, maybe there is other, but the research is clear that back-to-back meetings, with each one, stress goes higher and quality of decisions goes lower. Breaks in between, you can keep a steady. You can replenish those deliberative reserves by not doing back-to-backs. We make agenda mistakes. We put the easy items first when we have the greatest reserves. Now, that's not the same thing as a consent agenda, right? It's the easy items. The easy items are the ones that we actually want to put to the back when we have less reserve, right? And then we put the easy items first, we put the hard items last, we crunch them for time, we power through that last item when we don't have anything left to spare, skipping meals, skipping breaks, using breaks to check emails. These are all timing problems. Those pressures to get to the next thing, again, really change what's going on in here. Decisions made under pressure, whatever they are by the research riskier, more reactive, less accurate. Another way that timing matters: time of the day. I mentioned this a second ago. Time of the day. So some of this is about morning people, night people. Most of it is about the cycle, the circadian rhythm that we have in the course of the day. We see that in the research, getting up in the morning, our energy and our accuracy and our analytics rise to a peak early, trough through the middle of the day, and then recover to a second peak. So the best time of day to do analytical work is the morning, and the second best is the evening, and in between is the no-no, right? Now for the true night owls, that flips around a little bit. But if you dive into this deeper, you may discover that some of you who think you're night owls really are much less so than you think. The true morning folks and the true night owls are far fewer. The majority of us are sort of in the middle, right? We've got research that says you don't want to have surgery in the afternoon. You want to have it in the morning because more hospital mistakes happen then. You don't want to take math tests in the afternoon. Kids who take math tests have lower scores than kids who do it earlier in the day. Forget the teenage problem about sleeping in. That's a whole other animal. But there are all sorts of things that say our analytics are much better in the morning, and then in the evening second. We're much more accurate because we have much more vigilance. We have the guardrails are on, right? Now, the flip side of that is that maybe we're less likely to be creative first thing in the morning because we've got that higher vigilance. So if what you're talking about needs a certain amount of creativity or insight or aha, then sometimes some noise in your brain and some tired in your brain lets the security guards back down a little bit, gives you a little more freedom to think in different ways, right? It is a little less rule oriented. So it's important to think about what time of the day you're having these discussions. And it depends on the kind of discussion you want to have, right? And of course, all of this, a grain of salt, everything in moderation, other cliches, all that sort of stuff. I recognize that you have constraints and you have to have meetings when you have to have meetings. So the point is on this is recognizing where you need extra help in order to overcome nature, where nature is on your side, and where you're putting in place essentially protections and guardrails. Breaks can undo some of the other deficits. That's great news. Breaks can undo some of the other deficits, right? There are a couple different kinds of breaks to think about. One is what Daniel Pink calls vigilance breaks, and I'm sure plenty of others call them vigilance breaks too. But those are the breaks that say, you know what, we are inclined in this moment to act on autopilot and to skip over steps. So we're going to take an intentional timeout. These are the timeouts. Timeout to back off and check our checklist to make sure we've asked the questions we intended to ask, we've answered them, we know the details. The second kind of break is the restorative break. This is what, if you're in meetings with Sarah, this is when Sarah says, get up, go get a drink, go take care of yourself, go for a walk, get a breath of air, right? Restorative breaks are critical. Your decision capacity goes up after even a 5-minute break. On test taking after lunch, you can sort of, the dip that was coming into lunch, you can get back to where you were at the beginning of the day or even higher in terms of your IQ, your cognitive performance. There are just all sorts of examples of it. And you want to think about it in terms of what the Army calls this ultradian rhythm, right? The 90-minute sort of thing. And you'll notice in lots of meetings, folks do breaks every hour or 2 hours or hour and a half as sort of the happy medium. And that's because our bodies, it's not just our sleep cycles that run in 90-minute chunks. It's our energy throughout the day. So these are the waves within that larger full day wave. taking those breaks, there's just no substitution for it. Powering through a break to get done faster just means that the decision you make is more reactive, less likely to be accurate, more likely to be based on your biases, or your habits or assumptions, and not on data and those sorts of things, right? So at least 5 minutes, at least 5 minutes every hour and a half, hour and a half. Naps, naps and recess and walks outside and nature and talking to each other. These are breaks. Checking emails, not breaks. That doesn't count, because that's still pulling on your cognitive load, right? And in this context, lunch is actually the most important meal of the day, not just breakfast, but lunch. So a note on willpower in this. So decision quality declines with quantity. The more decisions you make in a row, the quality of them goes down. And that's where decision fatigue comes in, and you get all sorts of discussion about that. The one caveat that I encourage you to think about in this is there's some research that says if you believe you're going to be fatigued, you'll be more fatigued. Right? So changing your mindset to say that I have some willpower over this fatigue. I can, in fact, pinch myself and jump up and down and have some impact, really does have some impact. So at the same time, we have to recognize where our potential deficiencies are. Also recognize that we have agency. We have agency in all of this, right? So other time considerations: day of the week, time of the year, all those sorts of things. Firsts, if you're trying to get a change for your organization, right? If you want your governing body to make a big change, we think about changes around the first of the year, the first of the month, the first of the week, the first of the quarter. That's a thing, right? So that makes, think about when you're doing it in the calendar, not just in the day. That settling in and checking out, the entry and exit of meetings, those are big deals. Those are big deals. If you just run in, you skip the beginning stuff, and the beginning stuff then sets you on a path of reaction, reaction, reaction. And the same on the exit. If you're running out, trust me, I watch it all the time. You're running out long before you actually need to run out. Next up, space to explore and play. And I do mean play. We have to be creative. We have to be joyful. We have to have fun if we're going to be fully engaged on this side and interrupting the reflex. Here are the tables I promised you at the beginning of the session. Tables matter. Rooms matter. Setups matter. If you look at these tables in front of you, each of them has a different level of formality, a different level of authority. You can tell that there are different rules for what you can talk about, how you can talk about it, whom you can talk about, when you can talk about, right? So much of all of that has to do with the actual table and how it's set, how it's lit, how it's spaced, how you're spaced, whether it's okay to sit in comfy chairs or not comfy chairs, whether it's okay to be wearing a suit or not. All of that sends huge signals on how you interact. They're explicit, but they're implicit. They imply hierarchy, formality. Think about lighting. Think about sight lines. Can I actually see your face? If you want me to talk to you and you want me to feel your reaction, I need to see you. I need to be able to hear you and have the acoustics send your voice to me, not just out into the world. I need to not be overwhelmed by the distractions around me. I need to be physically comfortable in my space, which also means being aware of the tensions of who's next to me. All of these, the temperature, all of these things, we have to be intentional about every time, really. So the setups, right? If you're trying to be deliberative, you need to be over on the left side of the screen and the top side, that top quarter. More interaction, more opportunity for interaction. Again, can I see you, as opposed to turning around to try to talk to you, right? We need to think about the actual setups. Chevrons, right? That's more about the speaker. Classroom, that's more about the speaker. You can overcome these things, certainly. But the more circular, the more open, even think about whether or not there should be tables in front of folks or not. Now, not having anything in front of them can make folks feel exposed and make it actually harder for them to interact. So you have to know your folks. But sometimes not having stuff in front of them frees them up, right? So you have to know your folks. Third, permission. Permission to change the rules, permission to change expectations, to revisit issues, to take time, or to say, you know what, we're going to hold this for later because there's a better time for it. To confirm with each other, now, did I hear you say so-and-so, or I heard you say blah, 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 blah. Is that right? Or you said we should do this. When I say that, this is what I mean. Is that what you meant? We need to be able to have those confirmations, take those times. And sometimes permission, we can buoy that up by taking on different roles, right? So you've got a chair of the meeting. You can rotate chairs. You can have different people play different roles. You can have someone be the questioner in one meeting or the coach in one meeting. You can change these roles around, again, as a way of putting up guardrails, and guardrails to check that we're doing the things we want to do, that we're being generative, that we're asking the right questions, we're challenging assumptions, all that sort of thing, right? So permission. Fourth, free from distraction. Free scare quotes from distraction. There are so many distractions in our world. Remember when I said that we pay attention, and pay being a legitimate price? If we're going to focus to be able to have the generative conversations, to get up to those headwaters, to think first and think hard about what's important and what's at stake, we need to be aware of our internal distractions and our external distractions. Those that we have control over and those that we don't. Those that we have control over, we should give each other permission to fix. And honestly, one of those, I'm just going to put this out there. I'm not sure that we can let go of it completely, but there is at least some research out there that says that our smartphones, our phones, and that's our computers too, because of the email, the little notifications and all that sort of stuff, just having them in the room takes brain power away from us. So we need to think critically about what tech we use, what tech we let in the room. I'm going to challenge all of you to think about whether in your governing conversations, you can agree as a group that you are completely offline from this time until this time, so that the breaks in between, you're not actually checking emails. You've told your offices you are offline. It's serious. Distraction is the enemy. And anybody who thinks that you can be doing your email and listening, nope. It's just no. It's just a big hard no. Conference calls, we know you're multitasking. Don't do it. Video is better. We still know you're doing it. Don't do it. Speaking of video, we're all talking about Zoom fatigue, video fatigue, blah, 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 blah. The biggest part of that, it increasingly seems, is a mirror fatigue. Right now, I'm seeing myself and I'm watching myself gesticulate. It's not good for the psyche to stare at yourself in the mirror. So some businesses are responding by saying you can turn off cameras. My response to that is turning off cameras is about the pressure of having to clean up behind. But the real fatigue element here is about seeing yourself, which is less about turning off the camera than turning off your self view. So others can still see you, still see your reactions and those sorts of things, but you're not staring at yourself. And it's that really seems to be the crux of the pain. So, all right, the last piece of the puzzle, really concrete tools along the way, right? So we know that brain and body are core to all of this. We know we need to signal change. We know that we need to have time to think and discuss. We need space to explore and play. We need permission to question and change. And it all needs to be as free of distraction as possible. So what are some just concrete sorts of things? I can give you a long list of tools, but let's just sort of plow through a few of them. Self and group awareness. Know thyself. Know when you're know whether you are in fact a morning person or a night person, and take steps to correct for it. Know if you are someone who processes in the room or out of the room, and take steps to correct for it. Know yourself, and know in the meeting if you're slipping off, if you're dehydrated, if you need to get up and walk, if something is getting your way. Know it, work on it. 2, agreements. Set the ground rules for our meetings. We all think ground rules are great, and then we do it once and then we forget about it because it just seems like it's a detail. Set ground rules, make them obvious, repeat them, repeat them, repeat them. These are the cues and the signs that keep you on track. These are the practices and the rituals. Breathing. The power of a 4-4 or 4-8 breath that engages the back of your throat, that makes that inhale noise and that exhale noise back here on a slow 4 in and a slow 4 out. Do it 4 times. Engages the parasympathetic system, shuts down the reactive part, engages the creative part. It's something anybody can do anywhere, anytime. Likewise, a full body stretch engages, can change things. Checklists, those vigilance breaks. Do we agree on the assumptions? Do we have the data to support what we're talking about? What are your questions that you're going to put into place? Speaking of the questions, I'm going to come back to my friend Socrates. There's a great Socratic questions are a great place for generative thinking, no matter what. There are plenty of other models out there, right? Daniel Kahneman's got one that they refer to as MAP. That's a structured approach to decisions that really says, know what your decision criteria are, do the research, and then do your final, right? Don't do it out of order. Don't focus on the short term. Don't look backward and say that the cause is the result and those sorts of things. Quantify your answers. It's always quantifying when you can, right? Put a structure in place. The Heath brothers have another one in Indecisive. Widen your options. Go broad. Reality test your assumptions. Get some distance. In other words, sleep on it. Take that break, right? Be prepared to be wrong. Whatever your rules are, there are plenty of versions out there to do it. Look at what MIT Sloan has talked about in terms of fast goals instead of smart goals. Fast being frequently discussed, ambitious, specific, and transparent, that encourage you to think bigger as a result, but to come back to it over and over again. It's another method to think for using this. Our agendas. This is stuff you see in all the governance books, right? Discussions instead of reports. So what questions? Using the consent agenda to get stuff off your plate. Pre-reading. Oh my God, pre-reading. Silent starts. What's a silent start? A silent start is raising a topic on the agenda, having everyone quietly think about their answer and their thoughts, and write something down or take those breaths before engaging the conversation, as opposed to just diving in when inevitably the person that always dives in will dive in first. Or rotate who gets to dive in first and who gets to dive in last, right? Think about those sorts of things. Speaking of reports, Are you looking at data? Are you looking at insights? What level of information are you looking at? Be sure that that's part of your conversation. Robert's rules. Um, Robert's rules are a beautiful way of handling large numbers of people, large agendas, and actual legislative process. It is a bad, bad, bad way to explore ideas, engage in give and take, get creative, be deliberative. We want guardrails that help us ask questions, not guardrails that contain conversation. And Robert's Rules is all about containing conversation, and it's 600 some odd pages of containing. Anyway, I've said enough. I'm backing away slowly now. Minutes are important things, and we don't take them seriously enough. We either on the small end focus on only the votes, so you actually have no idea what happened in the meeting except for this vote was taken and this vote was taken. Or at the other end, they're almost transcripts, which holy crud, right? So in between is something that allows someone to read it as a narrative as if they weren't there, know what happened, know why decisions were made, and use it as a reference in the future. But there's a next step that if we want to engage in generative thinking more broadly, we need to have a way of carrying those rationales forward meeting to meeting. And I'm telling you, you're not going through your stack of minutes in every meeting. So what are the logs? What are the policy documents? What are the chronologies that compile the important part, right? The logs at the end of your bylaws that tell you when and why things changed, or the topical compilation that says this is when we discussed our settlement philosophy and when we made adjustments and why we made adjustments in one place, right? It's that next step of turning minutes as data into information that grounds our common understanding. So take time with this one. So this is what we're doing. We're trying to slow down in order to speed up, to be able to have more consequential decisions, to be able to have more durable decisions, to not just make a snap and then come back and revisit it 2 months from now because we don't actually know why we had the conversation we had. This is generative work. We're not just being fiduciaries, which we are every day. We're not just setting direction, but we're doing it based on common understanding. We're thinking first. We're thinking hard about what's issue and what's at stake. We're learning from the past. We're looking around us. We're anticipating what's coming at us. And all of that takes time, space, permission, free from distractions to focus. Take small steps, start somewhere, anywhere. Wherever you start, you will decide it's both too small and too big because everything telescopes, right? Focus on yes and. Just do a little something and yes and. If something pops up that deserves a larger conversation, start keeping those parking lots for future conversations so that you can make space for the larger discussion. Pick a couple questions that are your vigilance breaks. Just a couple questions. Whatever that is. How does this fit with our strategic plan? How does this fit with our mission? How will our members respond to this? How will this affect next year's rate setting? Whatever they are, pick those few questions and start embedding them in your practice in every meeting. And experiment, 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 and experiment some more. These are some good reads. These are more accessible than the Think Fast or Thinking Slow and Fast, the Kahneman book that is a heavier lift. These are easier. And they sort of take some of that work to the next place.